Sam Carter was used to surviving in hostile environments. After all, he had been stranded on more than one planet, forced to fend for himself. But nothing quite compared to Geralis, a wild world that seemed to breathe danger at every turn. The air was thick with humidity, the sky clouded with strange purple storms that never seemed to clear. Towering trees, with massive roots that reached like the fingers of some ancient creature, filled the landscape. Sam's ship had crashed here, and now it was up to him to survive until he could figure out a way off. His first task was to assess the damage. The ship's outer hull was scorched, half buried in a ravine. Parts of it were intact, but the engines were shot. Sam figured he had a few days, maybe a week, before the ship's life support systems gave out completely. He'd have to rely on his skills, scavenging, hunting, and using whatever tools he could salvage. With a sigh, Sam wiped the sweat off his brow and started to work. He knew Geralis wasn't a planet you could take lightly. Creatures the size of small buildings roamed the jungles and the indigenous species, while humanoid were as deadly as they were strong. It wasn't a friendly place, and Sam had learned long ago that when you crash land on a planet, you didn't wait for rescue. You did whatever it took to survive. As he scavenged for parts, something caught his attention, a movement just out of the corner of his eye. At first, Sam thought it was just the wind, but then he heard it, a low, rhythmic sound, like footsteps in the distance. His hand instinctively reached for the blaster at his side, though he knew it was likely useless by now. His survival instincts kicked in, and he went still, trying to make himself blend into the surroundings. The sound grew louder, closer. Then, from behind a thick cluster of vines, a figure appeared. Sam's breath caught in his throat as he realized what was coming toward him. It was no creature, no wild animal, but something far worse. A woman. But not just any woman. This one was tall, towering above him, with muscles that rippled under her skin as if she was carved from stone. Her skin was a deep greenish hue, and her eyes, glowing yellow, locked onto him with the cold precision of a predator. She wore armor, but it wasn't the kind he was used to. This armor was crafted from the bones of the creatures that lived on this planet, hard and polished, the markings of her people etched into it. Her hair was dark and braided, falling down her back like a rope. Sam had heard stories of the Amazonian warriors of Geralis, fierce hunters who were said to track and capture the deadliest prey in the galaxy. These were no ordinary beings. They were a culture built on strength and honor, and they hunted for sport. The thought of them hunting humans was nothing new. It was rumored that they saw humanity as a rare prize, something to be caught and displayed, like a trophy. This particular Amazonian warrior, if she could even be called that, stared at Sam for a long moment, sizing him up. He wasn't sure if she was evaluating him as a threat or just as a potential target. But he didn't wait to find out. With a swift motion, he ducked behind the wreckage of his ship, hoping to get some cover. His heart raced in his chest, his mind running through his options. He wasn't exactly armed for a fight. His blaster was a short-range weapon, barely functional. The rest of his gear was scattered around the crash site, most of it damaged. The jungle wasn't exactly friendly, and he wasn't about to take any chances. The woman, however, didn't seem in any hurry. She stepped forward, her heavy boots cracking through the underbrush with each step, moving with a grace that belied her size. Sam could hear the sound of her breathing, steady and rhythmic, as if she were a hunter who had done this 1,000 times before. She wasn't looking for food, he realized. She was looking for a trophy. Sam's mind raced. He had no choice but to play it smart. He had to get away. He had to make her believe he wasn't worth the hunt. But just as he turned to make a break for it, she spoke. Her voice was low, like the growl of a distant animal. "You cannot escape," she said in a language Sam didn't understand. But the tone was unmistakable. She wasn't asking. She was stating a fact. Sam swallowed hard, trying to calm his nerves. He needed a plan, and fast. This was no ordinary hunt. This was a fight for survival. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes, not with someone like her on his tail. As he took a step back, a sudden thought hit him. If he was going to survive, he needed to be unpredictable. He needed to fight back, but on his terms. This wasn't just about escaping. It was about turning the tables. Sam had never backed down from a fight. And this time, he wasn't going to start. Sam didn't wait around. As soon as the Amazonian warrior spoke, he bolted. He had no time to think about how dangerous she was. His only focus was on getting as far away from her as possible. The dense jungle of Geralis made for a tough escape route, but it also offered him one thing: cover. Giant trees with twisted trunks and thick vines created a maze of natural barriers, and Sam knew he could use them to his advantage. Behind him, the sound of heavy footsteps followed, each step punctuated by the crunch of leaves and branches. Sam glanced over his shoulder once, just in time to see her moving with terrifying speed, cutting through the jungle like it was nothing. She wasn't in a rush. She was confident, like she knew she would catch him eventually. But Sam wasn't ready to give up yet. He had survived worse odds before. He ducked behind a large boulder, breathing heavily, trying to steady his racing heart. Sweat trickled down his face, and his mind raced, looking for an escape plan. Think. He had to outsmart her. This wasn't a fight of strength, but of wits. Sam knew that if it came down to a head-to-head battle, he wouldn't stand a chance. He had to use the environment, use whatever resources he could find. As he crept through the underbrush, Sam heard something. A strange noise, a low growl. He froze, scanning the area. A pair of glowing eyes blinked back at him from behind a cluster of bushes. His heart skipped a beat, but it wasn't an enemy. It was a creature, one of the many strange, dangerous animals that roamed the planet. Sam had seen this kind of thing before. A large reptilian predator, known for being fast and aggressive. He could use this. Quickly, he retrieved a few items from his backpack: metal fragments, a coil of wire, and some scavenged electronic parts. He set to work quickly, setting a trap just out of view of where the creature had appeared. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was the only chance he had. If he could make the creature think Sam was a threat, maybe it would buy him some time. Meanwhile, Lyra was getting closer. Sam could hear the soft thud of her steps, almost like a rhythm, growing louder. The jungle seemed to quiet around her, as if the planet itself feared her presence. Sam felt a strange mix of admiration and dread. This woman was powerful, no doubt about it. She was everything he had read about: strong, fast, and relentless. Sam quickly moved to another location, positioning himself behind a thick tree trunk. He knew he had to keep her guessing. It wasn't enough to just hide. He had to keep her on edge, keep her from thinking she could catch him easily. The footsteps grew louder, and Sam held his breath. The Amazonian warrior was nearly upon him. He could hear the sound of her breathing, steady and calm, like she was taking her time, savoring the hunt. Her eyes darted back and forth, scanning the ground, looking for any sign of movement. She's close. Too close. Sam didn't wait for her to get any nearer. He pushed the button on the small device he had rigged earlier, and a burst of noise filled the air, a loud, unnatural sound. The creature, startled, charged forward, crashing through the brush. Lyra heard it too, and for a moment, she paused, watching the creature approach. Sam seized the opportunity. He moved quickly, darting in the opposite direction, weaving through the trees. The creature, more interested in the noise than the Amazonian, charged straight at Lyra. It was fast, its jaws snapping open and shut as it came toward her. For a brief second, Sam saw the warrior hesitate. She wasn't afraid, but she had to deal with the creature first. Her eyes narrowed in focus, and she dropped to one knee, drawing a massive spear from her back. The weapon glowed with an energy field, crackling with deadly power. She swung it with ease, slamming it into the creature's side, sending it crashing into the trees. Sam didn't stop to watch. He kept running, using every shortcut he knew, every bit of cover he could find. His legs burned, but he kept pushing forward, refusing to look back. The thought of being caught by someone like Lyra was terrifying, but the thought of being outsmarted by her was worse. He knew she wasn't just any warrior. She was a hunter. She hunted to prove her strength, to earn glory for her people. And Sam was the prize she had set her sights on. The jungle twisted and turned, but Sam was getting the hang of it. He wasn't a stranger to surviving on harsh worlds. As he ran, he tried to keep track of where Lyra was. He couldn't risk staying in one place for too long. The sound of her pursuit was relentless, like the beating of a drum, always behind him. Sam's pulse quickened. He had to keep moving. He was getting closer to the crash site again, closer to the wreckage where he had hidden some of his gear. Maybe he could make one last stand. Maybe, just maybe, he could turn the tables. But just as he thought he had gained some distance, a voice rang out from behind him, clear and calm despite the chaos of the hunt. "You cannot escape, human." It was Lyra's voice. She was gaining on him again, and Sam knew it was only a matter of time before she caught up. This hunt, this game of survival, was far from over. Sam's legs burned from running, but he pushed on. The sound of Lyra's pursuit was growing louder again, a steady rhythm that reminded him just how close she was. Every instinct told him to keep moving, to find another escape route, but he knew the truth. There was nowhere left to run. He had to face her. He took a sharp turn and ducked into a thick patch of vines, quickly scrambling behind a large tree. His heart hammered in his chest, and he tried to steady his breathing. Sweat poured down his face, his hands shaking. He needed time to think, time to plan. The jungle around him was eerily quiet now. The heavy footsteps that had been following him for so long were gone. Sam held his breath, hoping that she had lost his trail. But deep down, he knew better. Lyra wasn't the type to give up so easily. His mind raced as he scanned his surroundings. He needed to be smart about this. He couldn't fight her head-on. She was too strong, too fast. But Sam had something she didn't. He was human. And that meant he had the ability to think on his feet, to outsmart her. The faint rustling of leaves reached his ears. Sam's eyes narrowed. Lyra was close. He could feel it. Without warning, the underbrush in front of him cracked. Sam spun around just in time to see Lyra emerge from the trees, her towering figure almost glowing in the dim light. Her eyes, bright yellow and focused, locked onto him instantly. There was no hesitation in her gaze. She knew she had found her prey. Sam's pulse quickened, but he didn't show fear. He stood tall, taking a slow step backward as he sized her up. She was formidable, that much was clear. The muscles in her arms and legs rippled under her skin, and her armor, made of bone and metal, gleamed with a deadly shine. She carried a long, curved spear in one hand, its energy field humming with power. Lyra didn't speak, but the look in her eyes said everything. She was ready to fight, to claim her victory, and she was certain she would win. But Sam wasn't ready to give up. He took another step back, his mind already working, planning his next move. Lyra watched him carefully, her body coiled like a spring, ready to pounce. She was fast, too fast for him to outrun. But that didn't mean he couldn't trick her. Sam's eyes darted to the wreckage of his ship nearby. He had an idea, but it was risky. He needed to get to the ship, to the power core. If he could charge up one of the weapons, he might be able to disable her armor long enough to make his escape. He made his move. Sam darted to the side, moving quickly, trying to stay low. He heard Lyra's footsteps behind him, faster now, the thud of her boots against the ground sending vibrations through the air. She wasn't going to let him get away this time. But Sam was counting on her overconfidence. She thought she had him cornered, but that's when he made his move. With a quick motion, he threw a small device from his belt. It exploded with a blinding flash, temporarily blinding Lyra. Sam didn't wait to see if it worked. He ran for the ship, diving toward the wreckage, his hand outstretched to grab onto any piece of equipment that might help. He reached the ship's power core, its energy system still flickering weakly. Sam pulled out a few wires and began to work quickly, using his knowledge of ship mechanics. He knew if he could restore just enough power, he could trigger one of the energy weapons. It wouldn't last long, but it might give him the edge he needed. Behind him, Lyra recovered from the flash grenade, her angry roar echoing through the jungle. Sam didn't waste a second. He finished the wiring and activated the core, the weapon charging up with a low hum. The air around him crackled with energy. He turned just in time to see Lyra charging toward him, her spear raised high, ready to strike. With a quick motion, Sam activated the weapon. A burst of energy shot out, striking Lyra's armor directly. She was thrown back, the force of the blast knocking her off her feet. Her spear flew from her hands, and she landed hard on the ground. Sam didn't have time to celebrate. The weapon had drained most of the power from the ship's core, and it was only a matter of time before it would shut down. Lyra groaned as she slowly got back to her feet. Her armor had taken the brunt of the blast, but Sam could see the damage. She was stunned, but she wasn't finished. "I told you," Lyra growled, her voice low but filled with fury. "You cannot escape." Sam stood his ground, breathing heavily, his mind working furiously. He had slowed her down, but she wasn't done yet. He had one shot, and he needed to make it count. As Lyra began to charge again, Sam reached for his last weapon, the blaster. His hand shook as he aimed it at her, praying that it would work. Lyra didn't hesitate. She was already on the move, faster than Sam expected. But Sam wasn't going to give up. He fired. The shot hit her square in the chest, just below her armor. The energy burst sent her stumbling backward, and this time, she didn't get back up. Sam watched her carefully, heart pounding in his chest. He knew this wasn't the end. She would get up again. But for now, he had won the first round. He didn't wait. He turned and ran, knowing that the hunt wasn't over yet. He had outsmarted her for now, but Sam had no illusions. Lyra would be back, and next time, she might not make the same mistake. Sam's heart pounded as he sprinted deeper into the jungle. His breath came in sharp gasps, and his legs ached from the strain of running. But he couldn't stop now. He had gained a moment of respite after hitting Lyra with the blaster, but that was all it was, a moment. The Amazonian warrior wouldn't stay down for long. He needed to move, to keep himself hidden, and to figure out his next move. He darted through the dense underbrush, trying to stay low and quiet. The jungle seemed alive around him, the sounds of unseen creatures echoing in the distance. But there was a sense of stillness now, like the planet itself was watching him. Sam didn't dare look back. His only focus was getting to higher ground. He had to find a place where he could assess the situation, catch his breath, and figure out how to outwit Lyra for good. Finally, after what felt like hours, he stumbled upon a cliffside, the jagged rocks rising up before him. It wasn't much of a refuge, but at least it offered some height. From there, he could see the jungle spread out below, the massive trees and dense foliage stretching far and wide. If he could climb it, he'd have a better chance of spotting Lyra's movements. Sam didn't waste any time. He grabbed onto the rough surface of the rocks and started climbing, his fingers scraping against the stone as he pulled himself up. His muscles burned, but he pushed through, one hand after the other, pulling himself higher and higher. The view from the top was breathtaking, but there was no time to enjoy it. He had to stay sharp. When he finally reached a small plateau, Sam collapsed onto the ground, panting heavily. His body was sore from the running and climbing, and his mind was racing. He knew that Lyra wouldn't stop, not until she had caught him. But for now, he had to take a moment to think. His hands still shook from the adrenaline, but he forced himself to calm down. His blaster had given him a brief advantage, but it wouldn't last. He didn't have enough ammo, and he knew Lyra would be more cautious now. She had learned from their first encounter. Suddenly, Sam froze. He heard something, a faint rustling sound below. His heart skipped a beat. Could it be Gera? Had she tracked him here already? He quickly pulled himself to his feet, crouching low behind a large rock. The noise grew louder, but it wasn't the steady rhythm of Gera's footsteps. It was something different. Then, from the thick foliage, a figure emerged. Sam's eyes widened in disbelief. It wasn't Gera, but another Amazonian warrior. This one smaller, lighter on her feet, and wearing the same bone-crafted armor. She moved silently, as if she were part of the jungle itself. Sam's first instinct was to hide, but something about the way she moved made him hesitate. She didn't seem to be looking for him. She was focused on something else, something deeper in the jungle. He watched her for a moment, trying to decide whether to risk revealing himself. She had clearly spotted him by now, but instead of approaching him with hostility, she simply continued on her path, seemingly unaware of his presence. Sam took a cautious step forward, keeping low and using the natural cover to conceal himself. He didn't know if he could trust this Amazonian, but she was his best chance for survival right now. If he could figure out what she was doing here, maybe he could use it to his advantage. The warrior paused suddenly, her head tilting as if she had heard something. Sam's breath caught in his throat. She was close, too close, but rather than looking around for a threat, she took a step toward the cliffside, carefully examining the rocks. Sam followed her movement, his curiosity piqued. What was she doing? The warrior pressed a button on her wristband, and a soft, mechanical whirring sound filled the air. A small panel in the rock slid open, revealing the hidden passage. Sam's eyes widened in surprise. He had no idea such a thing existed on this planet. Was it a secret base? Some kind of outpost? The Amazonian stepped inside, disappearing into the darkness of the passage. Sam didn't hesitate. He needed answers. He quickly moved to the entrance, staying low and out of sight. His heart raced as he followed her into the hidden passage, unsure of what he would find. The tunnel was narrow, the walls rough and uneven. The air smelled damp, and the sound of dripping water echoed in the darkness. Sam's footsteps were soft, but his mind was loud with questions. Why was this Amazonian here? Was she with Gera? Was there some sort of alliance between the Amazonian warriors that he didn't know about? After a few minutes of careful walking, the passage opened up into a large cavern. The sight that greeted him was both strange and breathtaking. Inside the cavern were several Amazonian warriors, all gathered around what looked like a control center. Panels of glowing alien technology lined the walls, and in the center of the room was a large holographic map of Geralis. The Amazonian he had been following walked to the center of the room and spoke in a language Sam didn't understand, but it was clear from the tone of her voice that she was giving orders. The other warriors nodded, and they began to move with purpose, preparing for something. Sam's mind raced. What was going on here? He was about to turn back and leave when a voice behind him made him freeze. You shouldn't be here, human. Sam spun around to find the Amazonian warrior he had followed, standing in the shadows, her eyes glowing brightly. She had known he was there all along. For a moment, Sam thought she might attack, but instead, she stepped forward, a strange look in her eyes. I can help you, she said, her voice quiet, but you have to trust me. Sam stood frozen, unsure of what to make of the Amazonian warrior's words. She had caught him, but instead of attacking, she was offering help. The situation felt wrong, like a trap waiting to spring, but something in her eyes told him she wasn't lying. There was no malice in her expression, only a strange calmness, as though she had been waiting for him. He didn't know what to think. He had always trusted his instincts, and right now, they were telling him that this woman wasn't a threat. At least, not in the way Gera had been. Help me, Sam echoed, his voice wary but curious. Why would you help me? Aren't you one of Gera's people? The Amazonian warrior nodded, her face hardening briefly before softening again. I am, but I don't serve her. I have my own reasons for being here, and I don't share her goals. Sam narrowed his eyes. This was unexpected. Gera had made it clear she was after him. But if this woman wasn't with her, who was she working for? And why would she want to help him? "Who are you?" Sam asked, still cautious. "And why should I trust you?" The warrior sighed, stepping closer but keeping her distance. "My name is Lyra. I'm not a part of Gera's tribe, though I am from the same world. I'm an outcast." The word hit Sam like a cold wave. An outcast. This wasn't a term anyone used lightly, especially among the fiercely proud Amazonian warriors. They lived by strict codes, and betrayal was punishable by death. If she was truly an outcast, then she must have done something severe to fall out of favor with her people. Sam's mind raced. If she was telling the truth, she might be his best chance of survival. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice steady despite the confusion swirling in his mind. Lyra's eyes flickered with something, regret, perhaps, or a memory she wished she could forget. "I want to stop Gera," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "She is planning something terrible for your kind." Sam blinked in disbelief. "For my kind? What do you mean?" Lyra hesitated for a moment before speaking again, her voice low and measured. "Gera has an army. She plans to invade other planets, other systems, not just Geralis. Your Earth, for example. She believes that your people are weak, easy to conquer. But I disagree." Sam's mind whirled. An invasion. He had known the Amazonian warriors were strong, but this was something else entirely. Gera was planning to attack Earth. It was hard to believe, but the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. The ruthless determination he had seen in Gera, the way she hunted him like prey, it all pointed to someone who was preparing for war. But why would Lyra want to stop her? "Why don't you just kill Gera then?" Sam asked, his tone sharp. "You're a warrior, aren't you? Why wait around for me?" Lyra's gaze hardened again, but it was clear she wasn't angry. "It's not that simple. Gera is too strong. She commands loyalty through fear, and she has the backing of the highest council. To face her directly would be suicide." Sam's heart sank. If Gera had the support of the council, that meant she had more resources than Sam could even imagine. But Lyra had a point. Attacking her head-on would be a fool's errand. He needed to be smarter, just like before. "So, what's the plan?" Sam asked, leaning in slightly. He couldn't afford to waste any more time. Lyra looked around the cavern, making sure no one was listening. "I've been gathering information. There's a secret project underway, a weapon that Gera and her followers are building. If we destroy it, we might be able to slow down the invasion. It won't stop it completely, but it will buy us time." Sam frowned. "A weapon? What kind of weapon?" Lyra's eyes flashed with urgency. "I don't know the details, but I've seen some of the plans. It's big, much bigger than anything I've seen before. Gera's already sent teams to gather resources, and she's building it in a hidden base. If it's finished," she didn't need to finish the sentence. Sam could guess the rest. "What do we need to do?" Sam asked, his voice more determined now. Lyra's eyes softened. "You need to come with me. I can't do it alone." For a moment, Sam hesitated. He had been running for so long, just trying to survive. But now, there was something bigger at stake, something worth fighting for. Earth. His home. He had always dreamed of being part of something bigger, something more important than his life on Earth. Now, that dream was standing right in front of him, in the form of Lyra. "I'm in," Sam said, nodding. "Let's do this." Lyra gave him a quick, knowing glance. "Good, but we don't have much time. Gera will be back on her feet soon, and she'll be looking for you. We need to move fast." Without another word, she turned and led Sam toward the back of the cavern, where another passageway opened up. They would have to travel far, deep into the heart of the jungle, to reach Gera's hidden base. The journey would be dangerous, but Sam knew that this was his only shot to stop an invasion that could destroy everything he knew. The weight of it all settled over him, but he pushed it aside. He couldn't afford to think about the odds or how outmatched he was. He had a purpose now, and he wasn't going to let Shara win. The countdown had begun. The jungle was dark now, the thick canopy above blocking out most of the stars. Sam and Lyra moved in silence, the only sounds being the soft crunch of their feet on the forest floor and the occasional rustle of leaves. They had been traveling for hours, and the weight of their mission was starting to sink in. They were heading toward Jera's secret base, a place Sam had never imagined existed. Lyra had explained the route to him, but every twist and turn in the jungle felt unfamiliar, filled with the unknown. He had no idea what kind of security or dangers awaited them, but he knew that if they didn't succeed, Earth would be in grave danger. Sam glanced at Lyra as she led the way. Despite the urgency of their mission, she remained calm, her movements fluid and deliberate. She was a warrior, no doubt about it. The way she moved through the jungle, almost like she was one with the land, made Sam feel like an amateur. But he was here for a reason. He wasn't going to let fear slow him down. "Are we close?" Sam asked in a low voice, trying not to break the silence. Lyra gave a small nod, not turning around but speaking just loud enough for him to hear. "Not far. The base is hidden in a ravine about a mile ahead. We'll have to move quietly from here on out. Jera's people have patrols in the area." Sam felt his stomach tighten. Patrols. That meant soldiers, and that meant they wouldn't be able to just waltz in. "Do you have a plan for getting past them?" he asked. Lyra's eyes gleamed in the faint moonlight as she glanced back at him. "You're part of the plan." Sam raised an eyebrow. "Me?" She smirked, but there was no humor in it. "You're human. They won't be expecting a human. We use that to our advantage." Sam didn't understand at first, but then it clicked. If they thought he was just a regular prisoner or outsider, they might not be as cautious around him. It was a risky move, but it could work. The two of them slowed as they approached a clearing. Ahead, Sam could just make out the outlines of a structure. The base was camouflaged, blending in with the surrounding trees and rocks, but Sam could feel the weight of it. This was it. Lyra motioned for him to stop, and they crouched behind a large boulder, surveying the area. There were two guards standing near the entrance, their armor gleaming in the dim light. They were armed, weapons slung across their backs, and their attention was focused outward, scanning the jungle for any signs of intruders. Sam's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't going to be easy. Lyra's hand hovered near her belt, where a knife was sheathed. She looked at Sam, signaling for him to follow her lead. They needed to move fast and silently. But just as they were about to make their move, a voice called out from the distance. "Did you hear that?" The guards tensed, their heads turning in unison toward the sound. Sam's blood ran cold. This wasn't good. Lyra didn't hesitate. She grabbed Sam's arm and pulled him back into the shadows, guiding him along the edge of the clearing. The last thing they needed was to be spotted. They crouched low as the guards' voices grew louder. One of them was moving closer, stepping into the shadow where they had been standing moments before. Sam could feel his heartbeat in his ears, the fear creeping up his spine. Lyra's hand was firm on his wrist, keeping him still. She was calm, even in the face of danger, and Sam forced himself to do the same. He couldn't afford to panic now. The guard walked past them, just inches away, his heavy boots crunching against the ground. Sam held his breath, willing himself to remain perfectly still. It felt like the guard could hear his every heartbeat. But the moment passed, and the guard continued on, unaware of their presence. When they were sure the guard had moved far enough away, Lyra motioned for Sam to follow her. They made their way around the edge of the clearing, moving swiftly but quietly. The entrance to the base was just ahead, but the patrols were getting closer. They reached a small gap in the rocks, a hidden entrance that Lyra had identified earlier. Without a word, she slid through the opening, and Sam followed. The space was tight, barely enough to fit through, but it led them into the heart of the base. Inside, The atmosphere was colder, more sterile. The walls were made of smooth, metal-like material, and the lighting was dim but steady. There were no guards here, at least none immediately visible. Sam had a brief moment of hope, but he knew better than to get comfortable. Lyra moved quickly, her eyes scanning every corner. She pulled Sam into a small hallway, the walls lined with technology Sam didn't recognize. Screens flickered with strange symbols, and the air smelled faintly of machinery. This was the heart of Geralis' operation. Sam had to admit, he hadn't expected anything like this. He had imagined something more primitive, but this was high-tech, advanced. Lyra stopped in front of a door and pressed a series of buttons on a panel beside it. The door slid open with a quiet hiss, revealing a room filled with large containers. Sam's eyes widened as he took in the sight. The containers were filled with strange, glowing materials, alien technology, maybe even weapons. "This is it," Lyra said, her voice low and urgent. "This is where they're building the weapon. If we destroy this room, we'll cripple their operations. It'll slow them down long enough for the Federation to respond." Sam nodded, his mind already working. He had no idea how to destroy this tech, but he trusted Lyra. She knew what she was doing. "We don't have much time," she added. "Jara will be here soon, and when she arrives, this place will be crawling with her soldiers." Sam's heart beat faster. They were this close. He wasn't about to let Jara win. Not now. Not ever. The room felt colder now, the low hum of the alien machinery echoing in the silence. Sam's breath was shallow, his mind racing. He was standing in the heart of the enemy's operation, surrounded by strange glowing containers filled with technology he couldn't begin to understand. The pressure of the situation pressed down on him, but there was no turning back. He had come too far. Lyra moved quickly, her eyes scanning the room with purpose. She stepped toward the largest container, her fingers brushing over the control panel. "This is it," she murmured, more to herself than to Sam. "This is the core of their weapon." Sam watched her, his gaze flicking between the glowing containers and the door they had just entered through. They had no idea how long they had before Geralis patrols discovered their presence. He could feel the weight of time slipping away. "You know how to shut it down?" Sam asked, his voice tense. Lyra didn't answer immediately. Her fingers danced across the control panel, the lights above flickering in response to her touch. Finally, she nodded. "I do. But it won't be easy. I'll need to override the system. It's locked tight. And Geralis' tech is advanced. If I make a mistake, we won't just blow this room. We'll set off an alarm across the entire base." Sam's stomach tightened. The stakes were higher than ever, but there was no other choice. "Do it," he said, his voice firm. Lyra met his gaze, her eyes hardening. She didn't hesitate. Her hands moved swiftly, pressing buttons, pulling levers. The room seemed to pulse with a strange energy as she worked, the glowing containers flickering as if reacting to her actions. Sam stood at the door, watching for any sign of danger. The last thing they needed was to be interrupted while Lyra was working. Time seemed to slow. Sam's senses were on high alert, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. Every small sound felt amplified. Footsteps in the distance, the faintest hum of machinery, the air rushing in his ears. Then, without warning, a loud click echoed through the room. The lights above flickered violently, casting the room in momentary darkness before they came back on. Sam's heart raced. "I did it," Lyra whispered, her voice tight with effort. "The weapon's core is deactivated. The system is shutting down." Sam felt a surge of relief, but it was short-lived. He heard footsteps in the hallway, heavy and deliberate. Geralis soldiers were getting closer. "We don't have much time," Lyra said, turning toward Sam with urgency in her eyes. "The base will be on high alert soon. We need to get out now." Sam nodded, his pulse quickening. They had succeeded, but the hardest part was still ahead. They needed to escape without being caught. He quickly scanned the room, looking for another exit. "There's an air vent above," Lyra said, reading his thoughts. "It'll lead us to the outside. It's our only chance." Without another word, Lyra grabbed a crate and pushed it toward the wall. She climbed onto it and reached up to the vent cover, prying it open with ease. She didn't hesitate as she crawled through, disappearing into the dark shaft. Sam followed quickly, pulling himself up and into the vent after her. The narrow space was cramped, but they had no time to waste. The sound of alarms began to blare in the distance, the warning signal echoing through the base. The two of them moved swiftly through the vent system, navigating tight turns and small shafts that led deeper into the complex. Sam's mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. They had deactivated the weapon, but Chera would not take this defeat lying down. She would come after them with everything she had. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the end of the vent shaft. Lyra peeked out cautiously, her eyes scanning the area before she signaled for Sam to follow. They crawled out of the shaft and found themselves in a narrow alleyway behind the base. The jungle was still a few hundred yards away, but it was their only path to freedom. Just as they were about to move, the unmistakable sound of footsteps approached. Sam's heart leaped into his throat. They weren't alone. Lyra grabbed his arm and pulled him into the shadows, her hand clamping over his mouth to silence him. They pressed against the wall, hearts pounding, as Chera's soldiers passed by without noticing them. Sam held his breath, praying they wouldn't be spotted. The soldiers were just a few feet away, but they didn't look in their direction. After what felt like forever, the sound of the footsteps faded into the distance. Lyra let out a slow breath, her body relaxing. "That was too close," she whispered. The jungle was waiting. They moved quickly, staying low and silent, as they made their way toward the trees. The jungle seemed like a world away from the cold, sterile base they had just left behind. The familiar sounds of wildlife surrounded them, and Sam felt a brief sense of hope. But they weren't safe yet. Gera wouldn't give up so easily. The next battle was already on the horizon. Sam didn't know how much longer they had before Gera came after them. But he knew one thing for sure. They had a chance. They had won this round. And that was enough to fuel him for what was to come. As they disappeared into the shadows of the jungle, Sam felt something stir within him, a sense of purpose. He wasn't just a victim anymore. He was part of something bigger, something worth fighting for. And he wasn't about to stop until Gera's invasion was stopped for good.